Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? In the 1940s and 50s, that was the dreaded question in Hollywood. Why? Because if you were even remotely suspected of being a communist, your name was put on the list, the incriminating blacklist. Your reputation was ruined, your parking space was reassigned, and you never ate lunch in this town again.
You're an item one day, you're nobody the next day. This is a town of lists, A-lists, B-lists, blacklists.
On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll expose the dark forces behind the Hollywood blacklist, and we'll reveal the devastating consequences if your name appeared on the list.
They were destroyed, killed, made ill, suicides.
We'll also hear the confessions of a government witness who found himself trapped in a desperate situation.
I used to get calls in the middle of the night saying, look, you so-and-so, don't you dare cooperate with a committee.
I'm a New Yorker. I come from the East Side. A snitch is a creep. Am I right?
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we look back on the most notorious production in movie-making history, the Hollywood blacklist. In October 1947, congressional hearings were held by the House Committee on Un-American Activities. The committee was investigating communism in the entertainment industry. Paul Buell is the co-author of Tender Comrades.
The point of the public hearing was to expose the evil of these people playing a role in Hollywood, and to get them to name the names of other people they had known and participated in through public events.
Would you name those for the committee, please?
Well, the one chap I'm thinking of currently is Mr. Howard De Silva. Always seems to have something to say at the wrong time.
Film star Robert Taylor testified about what he considered were subversive activities within Hollywood. Character actor Howard De Silva may or may not have been a communist, but De Silva was just one of the people named by Taylor as a potential communist traitor. Blacklisted screenwriter Bernie Gordon.
When people like Robert Taylor suddenly became so vociferously anti-communist and pro-House Un-American Activities Committee, it surprised me.
Even more surprising was how membership in a popular political party became a national threat. After the Great Depression, many Americans were sympathetic to the communist agenda. Walter Bernstein was another screenwriter on the blacklist.
The communists were out in front, really, against fascism, against, during the 30s, against unemployment, against racism.
We saw bread lines through all the dim, dismal winter days of New York, and we believed that capitalism was failing.
But by the late 40s, many people came to believe communism threatened American values, and the committee suspected that anti-American messages were being interjected in films. Kenneth Lloyd Billingsley is the author of Hollywood Party and believes some communists were motivated to come to Hollywood.
They wanted more influence in the movie industry because the movies at that time were the biggest means of mass communication.
Actor James Cromwell disagrees.
Anybody in the film industry knows that it's almost impossible in the studio system to get any propaganda through into a picture because basically so many hands touch the picture.
I don't think in a group of writers it's possible for them to get away with it. Have you ever tried to organize a group of writers to do anything?
But the committee hearings in October 1947 were no laughing matter for the 10 Hollywood professionals called to testify about their political affiliations. The men refused to cooperate, and all 10 were eventually incarcerated. Then in November of '47, 50 Hollywood power brokers met secretly to discuss the growing controversy. Del Reisman is the former president of the Writers Guild of America.
A group of the studio heads met at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York and issued a declaration saying they would not employ anyone who was a member of the Communist Party or who did not renounce that membership.
If communists have attempted to inject their propaganda into the motion picture, they have failed miserably. We will never permit them to succeed.
Film producer and director Irwin Winkler.
The Hollywood community, in answer to pressure from businesses and their own self-serving pressure, decided that they would form a blacklist.
The fear of being put on Hollywood's blacklist turned Tinseltown upside down. Straight ahead, the victims of the blacklist and the witnesses who name names.
Of the illegality of this committee came out. Then effort indicated by questioning to induce the motion picture producers to create a blacklist, to hire men not on the basis of ability, but on the basis of political belief.
Beginning in 1947, the Hollywood blacklist brought humiliation and unemployment to hundreds of film professionals. And several men even went to jail for refusing to cooperate with the House Committee on Un-American Activities. You see, it wasn't illegal to be a communist, but it certainly wasn't politically correct for the time. The goal of the committee was to root out potential commie threats from within the entertainment industry, and extreme measures were taken to preserve so-called American values.
The real purpose of this investigation...
That is not question.
Of the motion picture industry.
This is Humphrey Bogart. We sat in the committee room and heard it happen. We saw it. We saw American citizens denied the right to speak by elected representatives of the people.
If the fear of communism was spreading in 1947, by 1951, the hunt for red radicals became a national pastime. Hollywood studio bosses turned their backs on the talented actors, directors, and writers who were suspected members of the Communist Party. So to avoid being blacklisted, some entertainers reluctantly volunteered information about their political history.
A large number of the people who gave friendly testimony gave it under extreme duress and felt terrible about it much of the rest of their life. Larry Parks is one very good example.
He had starred in the Jolson story, and he was on his way to a major career when his career was just absolutely stopped immediately by his appearance before the House Committee.
Victor Novosky is the author of Naming Names.
He had joined the Communist Party, and he was willing to tell the committee about it. He wasn't denouncing. He just said, let me alone. I'll tell you about me. I just don't want to talk about other people and bring trouble to them.
Don't present me with the choice of either being in contempt of this committee and going to jail, or forcing me to crawl through the mud to be an informer. I beg you not to force me to do this.
But he did name names, and they made him crawl through the mud, and they still got blacklisted.
Composer David Raksin.
They destroyed that poor guy, and they wouldn't let him up. They could have done that when they realized that he was being killed, murdered in front of the cameras.
Another actor who suffered as a result of his testimony was Lee J. Cobb. Cobb was put on Hollywood's blacklist in 1951 after Larry Parks named him as a communist.
My father-in-law, Lee J. Cobb, was approached by his agent and told that if he did not cooperate, he would not work again.
For 2 years, Cobb resisted the demand for information by the committee. Blacklisted and broke, Cobb was finally forced to testify in 1953. Lee J. Cobb's daughter, actress Julie Cobb.
He told me that he did not provide the committee with names, that he was shown names. There are people to this day who will tell me, no, your father named me. I don't know. I don't care. We cannot afford to judge the actions of anybody who was put in that position.
Composer David Raksin found himself in a similar predicament when he was identified as a former member of the Communist Party. Raksin had to either cooperate with the committee or end up on the blacklist.
My family was not going to have anything to eat or any place to live and all the rest of that, and it kept me awake nights.
Raksin testified before the committee in 1951. He was determined to beat the blacklist without helping the committee's investigation.
I will not name anybody who hasn't already been named. And I thought, that is a risk I'm willing to take. I'm not going to get anybody into hot water who hasn't already been named.
Abraham Polanski was a blacklisted screenwriter. Before the blacklist, Polanski worked with David Raksin.
And he came to my house one day. He says, I want to keep on working at it. So would you give me permission to use your name? I said, no, don't be silly. I said, I can't give you permission to do it. You have to do it, go do it.
That's a lie. It's an absolute lie. I would never have asked that son of a bitch anything, not even his name.
In my neighborhood, you don't snitch. In fact, you get killed if you watch, so watch out.
If I had been a cooperative witness and think how come I was not able to work for a year and a half. I couldn't get a job. Nobody would hire me.
He said he was sorry. I have nothing against him. He's just embarrassed by the fact that this fact was revealed.
Nearly 50 years later, the survivors of the blacklist still feel the sting of betrayal. When we come back, what were the alternatives to naming names? And how did some blacklisted screenwriters manage to keep their jobs and their dignity? It was on trial. If you were called to testify before the Congressional Committee about your political affiliations, there were 3 ways to go. You could refuse to answer the questions based on your First Amendment right of free speech and association, but you risk going to prison for contempt of Congress. If you invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, you were immediately blacklisted and permanently unemployed. For many, the only alternative was to cooperate with the committee and name names. Composer David Raxon tried to circumvent the committee by only naming people who were already identified.
I don't know whether there was any other honorable course. And I'm not sure how honorable it would have been to go to jail. It would have given them a victory they didn't deserve. So I survived, and I judged myself very harshly.
Like so many other Hollywood professionals, Raxon was put in a no-win situation, and there wasn't a single studio executive to back him up.
The reason was that they would have been attacked by the committee and accused of harboring communists, and it would have harmed their profits.
The Motion Picture Industry Council meets to draft a letter to the House Un-American Affairs Committee, now in session in Hollywood.
We are hopeful that through and as a result of the hearings of your committee, ways and means will be provided which will enable the nation to fairly, legally, and effectively deal with the problems of communist or subversive elements.
Bernie Gordon was a writer working for Warner Brothers when he was called to testify in front of the committee in 1952. But even before he was allowed to defend himself, Gordon was blacklisted.
Not just that I was fired, but I had done nothing. I mean, I had just not taken a subpoena. I had taken a subpoena. I had not testified officially. I hadn't testified. Why was I blacklisted?
We have subpoenaed witnesses representing both sides of the question. All we are after are the facts.
In truth, the committee members just wanted names. Critics of the committee suspected Congress already had lists of people who were affiliated with the Communist Party. So why did the committee pressure witnesses to rat on their friends?
It was intimidation. It was, all in the service of the blacklist.
In 1951, writer Abraham Polanski was also subpoenaed, and he testified before the committee. But Polanski refused to implicate himself or name names.
A snitch is a creep. Am I right? And so, you don't talk to creeps, to hell with them. Either you're brought up not to be a snitch, to have a certain morality, and you live it.
Polanski pleaded the Fifth, which earned Abe a place on the Hollywood blacklist.
The committee was acting illegally all the way through. They have no right to ask these questions of anybody. It's against the law to blacklist people.
Walter Bernstein was a television writer living in New York when he was blacklisted in 1950. Bernstein never testified before the committee, but he was fired just the same.
A booklet had just come out called Red Channels, which was a listing of about 150 people in the entertainment business. And if your name was in Red Channels, you were automatically blacklisted unless you went and cleared yourself.
Bernstein and Polanski never felt they had to clear themselves because in their minds they had done no wrong. Instead, the two writers joined a third blacklistee, Arnold Manoff, to write for a TV program called You Are There. Show producer Charlie Russell and director Sidney Lumet hired all 3 blacklisted writers, but kept their true identities under wraps.
Went on for 2 or 3 years, and since Russell and Lumet both knew that these blacklisted writers were working, we had to put the names of real life fronts on the scripts, but none of them had to show up really.
So the blacklisted writers did all the work, and all the fronts had to do was lend their names.
Charlie Russell was glad to get us. After all, we're $2,000 a week writers, which is the top of the line, and we'll want to work for peanuts there.
Some consider these men lucky to have jobs during the blacklist era.
Why should I be lucky? I'm working because I'm good. They're lucky to have me.
Fortunately, some writers were able to circumvent the blacklist by writing under a pen name, but earning a living was impossible for many actors and directors. Coming up, how is the entertainment community trying to right the wrongs of Hollywood's shameful past? Hollywood blacklist ravaged Tinseltown. Many writers, actors, and directors never recovered emotionally or professionally from being blacklisted. Others were tortured by their decision to cooperate with the congressional committee and betray their friends.
People simply didn't have the strength to stand up to the committee. They were really victimized, and I didn't feel bitter about people like that. I just felt that sorry for them.
20 years after testifying before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, actor Lee J. Cobb was still devastated about naming names. Julie Cobb recalls the only time her father talked to her about his actions.
And we spoke for 3 hours in the car. A lot of that time he was holding his head and crying. He shared with me everything that he had done and not done, and what the price was he paid for it. I remember him saying, "You have no idea what it feels like to have the United States government decide it wants you. It wants something from you." And so he was dogged by them.
It is an issue you die for some people, but not for me. And I don't feel I betrayed anybody when it really comes right down to it.
Elia Kazan was a famous director in Hollywood when he was called before the committee in 1952. At one time, Kazan had been a loyal member of the Communist Party. Screenwriter Walter Bernstein worked with Kazan.
Kazan said to me, "That's the side I'm on. These are the people that I want to be with all the time." And then the next month he testified and informed. I was shocked.
He had every opportunity to continue working on Broadway where it would not have affected him. And yet, he went and became an informer in order to protect whatever career he had in motion pictures. And I just think he was one of the bad people.
In 1954, Elia Kazan directed On the Waterfront. The film starred a young Marlon Brando. Brando's character was a whistleblower who informs on his crooked boss. Many felt that the movie was Kazan's attempt to defend his decision to testify.
You wanted my philosophy of life. Do it to him before he does it to you.
It was a weird attempt to justify his behavior. That's what it's all about. It was a movie of stool pigeons, by stool pigeons, for stool pigeons.
Nevertheless, Kazan was rewarded for his efforts with a Best Director Oscar for On the Waterfront. It's impossible to identify how many artists were affected by the blacklist, but we do know that when the committee hearings officially ended in 1953, several hundred actors, directors, stagehands, and writers were out of work. Celebrated screenwriter Dalton Trumbo was one of the first writers to be blacklisted in 1947. Trumbo's name was absent from the screen until the 1960 movie Spartacus.
Kirk Douglas was the producer and star of the picture, and Kirk Douglas put Dalton Trumbo's name on the screen, not knowing what the reaction would be.
Nicola Trumbo is Dalton Trumbo's daughter. Nicola remembers her father's pride and relief.
He was determined to break the blacklist. He clearly he felt it was wrong. He knew it was wrong, and he didn't want to break it just for himself.
The truth is, the blacklist only broke writer by writer, actor by actor, studio by studio. For the bulk of blacklistees, it never ended because they never got work again.
But Walter Bernstein had the last laugh. In 1976, Bernstein wrote the Oscar-nominated film The Front, a comedy about the blacklist era starring Woody Allen.
I still don't know who you are. I only know who you're not. Who is Howard Prince?
I front for blacklisted writers.
You're not a writer.
No, I couldn't write a grocery list.
It was an acknowledgement, really, of the workers in the movie industry making some statement about the blacklist.
The Writers Guild of America is also making up for the injustice of the blacklist. Since 1992, the Guild has been reviewing film contracts from the blacklist era to determine if the screen credit is correct or a front. The Guild then releases its findings to the film company that produced the movie.
And when they make cassettes or new prints, they have agreed to put the correct writing credit on the new print or the cassette. And we want to be able to say, well, these people made the pictures, without resorting to false names.
In 1997, the Writers Guild apologized to the Hollywood community for supporting the blacklist in the 1950s.
Nevertheless, some very good people in the Guild were very eager to make up for the terrible behavior that the Writers Guild, the Actors Guild, the Directors Guild, all they had all cooperated with the committee and refused to defend their own members.
Everybody is willing to apologize, and I accept it. And I no longer consider these people sneaks, crooks, and snitches. But I do know that where I come from, they wouldn't have lasted that long. They wouldn't have to apologize. They'd be dead.
The Hollywood blacklist destroyed friendships, tested loyalties, and ruined careers. And in many ways, the cruel side effects of the blacklist are still being felt. I'm A.J. Benza. Join me the next time we take a stroll down the flip side of Hollywood's Walk of Fame.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of Americanism.
That's not the question. The question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
7-year-old Ring Lardner Jr. won an Academy Award for writing the movie Woman of the Year, which paired Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn for the first time. In 1949, Lardner wrote Forbidden Street, starring Maureen O'Hara. Lardner's name would not appear on another film for 16 years. In 1945, Dalton Trumbo wrote Our Vines Have Tender Grapes. Although the film was considered a classic, Trumbo's name would not appear in another film until Exodus in 1960, 15 years later. The question is, where did these guys go? The answer to that question is scarier than any horror movie. Lardner, Trumbo, and 8 other talented filmmakers were sent to prison and blacklisted. Hollywood was on trial. These 10 men, victims of a political witch hunt, became known as the Hollywood 10. Their story is one of the darkest chapters in American history.
Those men were all heroes. They stood up for what they believed in. They went to prison for their beliefs.
It has become very clear to me that the real purpose of this investigation...
That is not question.
This was a period of hysteria, and all you had to do was use the word communist, and someone was finished.
On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll reopen the case of the Hollywood 10. Was this merely a witch hunt conducted by hysterical government buffoons, or was there a communist plot to take over Tinseltown?
There were a lot of communists in the Guild, and if they got a script or a treatment, a pitch of some kind that they construed as anti-Soviet, they would do their best to kill it.
We'll also have an exclusive interview with one of the surviving members of the Hollywood 10.
It's a perfectly illegal party. We decided that we did not want to answer the question to say, yes, I am a communist.
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we look back at the broken lives and shattered careers of the Hollywood 10. It was October of 1947. World War II had been over for 2 years. The Nazi threat had been replaced by the fear of communism. America was in the grip of the Red Scare, and some members of Congress decided to capitalize on that fear. The House Committee on Un-American Activities began holding hearings to determine the extent of the communist threat. The committee focused their investigation on liberal Hollywood. John Cromwell was a film director suspected of being a communist. His son is actor James Cromwell.
Basically, it was a number of representatives who didn't have anything better to do and who wanted to stir up a little publicity for themselves.
Victor Navasky is the author of Naming Names.
There was, in the beginning, an effort by the committee to establish communist propaganda in films in Hollywood, and they couldn't do it.
And why couldn't they do it? Because there was no propaganda. In fact, these unsubstantiated rumors had been circulating since the late 1930s. Joan Scott is the widow of writer-producer Adrian Scott, one of the Hollywood 10.
And they even had material showing that Shirley Temple, who was 9 then, I think, was a communist. I mean, it was a bizarre publicity hunt.
So the committee abandoned that search and contented itself for most of the period with just stigmatizing people who had belonged to the party.
The reality is that since the Great Depression, many people in Hollywood, along with a lot of other Americans, did believe that communism might be a good thing. Frances Cheney Lardner is the wife of Ring Lardner Jr., one of the Hollywood 10.
The values that we then believed were the values of the Communist Party were just extraordinary to make a better world, to make a world where there would be equality for people, where people would have work, where people would not be discriminated against.
But for the Hollywood 10, this is a free speech issue. Remember the First Amendment? About 40 Hollywood insiders were called to testify before the committee. Most were only too happy to accommodate and sang like canaries. These folks came to be known as the friendly witnesses.
George Murphy, Ronald Reagan, and Robert Montgomery are among the top-flight movie actors testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee in Washington. Appearing before the inquiry board investigating communist infiltration in Hollywood, producer Sam Wood wastes no words condemning the Red Party line and its sympathizers.
No, sir, I haven't. I think that I think you have to awaken the public to the fact that they are here and what they're doing.
Larry Supplair is the co-author of The Inquisition in Hollywood.
People like Gary Cooper, famous names, who would come to tell the committee, yes, we think what you're doing is good, and there is communism in Hollywood. Gary Cooper seemed to me idiotic in his testimony.
Although I don't know, I have never read Karl Marx, and I don't know the basis of communism beyond what I've picked up from hearsay. What I've heard, I don't like it, because it isn't on the level.
It is completely against the un-American feeling, this communistic thing. I believe I would move to the state of Texas if it ever came here, because I think the Texans would kill them on sight.
Christopher Trumbo is the son of writer Dalton Trumbo, one of the Hollywood 10.
The friendly witnesses who had appeared before were able to speak at length about anything that they wanted and for as long as they wanted.
Those who objected to being grilled about their political beliefs became known as the unfriendly witnesses.
Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Question
now,
Fuller.
Mr. Beaverman,
Your purpose is to use this to disrupt the motion picture industry, to invade the right not only of me, but of the producers to their thoughts, to their opinions, and this I will not permit.
Up next, how did 10 patriotic Americans who refused to answer that now infamous question become enemies of the state? He held hearings in an effort to flush out commies who were supposedly hiding behind every palm tree in Hollywood. Dozens of actors, writers, and directors were summoned to Capitol Hill to testify. Most called before the committee were only too happy to oblige, but 10 men refused to answer questions about their political beliefs. Their defense? A little thing called the First Amendment. These rebels became known as the Hollywood 10.
Do you decline to answer the question, Mr. Scott?
I believe that question also invades my right as a citizen. I believe it also invades the First Amendment. I believe that I should not engage in any conspiracy with you to invade the First Amendment.
Nobody knew what to expect, and they found out rather quickly that if your lawyer got up to say something, they would tell him to sit down or they'd throw him out.
Bartley Crum was one of the attorneys representing the Hollywood 10. Crum believed his clients had an ironclad case. Crum's daughter, celebrated author Patricia Bosworth.
Because he felt it was totally a constitutional issue, that it would be very easy to solve this little problem that these writers and directors were having.
At first, many in Hollywood stood behind the 10 men. Stars such as Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, and Danny Kaye traveled to Washington to show their support. Kenneth Lloyd Billingsley is the author of Hollywood Party.
It was a circus. You know, the 10 would get up and harangue. Trumbo, for example, said, "This is the beginning of the American concentration camp." And all the celebrities who came were shocked.
Stand away from the stand. For Americanism for many years, and I stand away from the stand.
None of the Hollywood heavy hitters expected the 10 to be so confrontational. They were also worried about saving their own skin, and most withdrew their support and hopped the next plane back to Hollywood. Writers Ring Lardner Jr. and Dalton Trumbo decided that simply refusing to answer the question was their most effective strategy.
Dalton Trumbo and I had discussed the question several months before, anticipating that there would be such hearings. And we decided that the only proper answer was not to answer.
You refuse to answer that question. Is that correct?
I have told you that I will offer my beliefs, my affiliations, and everything else to the American public.
No communists had been arrested. It was not considered a crime.
It was a witch hunt. It was in no way justified.
Mr. Bieberman. Go ahead, ask
Mr. Bieberman. Are you a member of the Communist Party, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
They looked unfair. It looked like here's a House Committee on Un-American Activities who wasn't behaving in an American way.
It's unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of Americanism.
That's not the question.
When Chairman Thomas was pressing me to answer the question, he said, now, any good American could answer that question. So, tell me, Mr. Ryder, are you now or have you ever been
a member of the Communist Party?
It depends.
Any real American?
It depends on the circumstances. See, I could answer, but if I did, I'd hate myself in the morning.
Leave the witness stand.
That just got him furious, and he said, leave the witness stand, and called on the sergeant-at-arms to take me away.
The Hollywood 10 knew the committee wouldn't stop with just one question.
First, there was the fact that if you cooperated with the committee on level A, you had to go to level B, which was naming names, which meant that other people would lose their jobs and livelihoods.
I doubt that any of them would have wanted to inform on get their former comrades or present comrades in trouble.
All right, are you a member of the Communist Party?
I have replied to that. You have no right to ask me that.
The witness is through. Stand away.
After 10 days of testimony, the committee adjourned.
They stopped because it was total chaos and bedlam, and the press was ridiculing them, and they probably were told by other members of Congress that it was ridiculous what was going on.
None of the Hollywood 10 answered the question about their political beliefs, and none of them named any names. Despite the pressure, these guys held their ground. But the witch hunt was far from over. Up next, what would be their punishment, and which one of the 10 would finally break ranks in order to save his own career?
Catch a sneak.
Round one of the congressional hearings into the commie plot to take over Hollywood ended in 1947. The filmmakers who refused to testify, labeled the Hollywood 10, were all charged with contempt. If found guilty, they'd be sent to prison. Oh yeah, and one more thing. They'd also be stripped of their livelihoods. Which brings us to yet another sad chapter in Hollywood history, the blacklist.
The Producers Association meets in New York and votes to blacklist those 10 men unless they go back before a committee of Congress and kind of purge themselves of their contemptuous conduct.
The heads of the studios, the motion picture companies met and said they would no longer employ any of us and or anyone else who took a similar stand.
And they released that statement, and that was the official beginning of the blacklist.
But the Hollywood 10 still refused to budge.
I was just summoned to the studio manager's office and told that my contract was being broken and that I was to leave the lot.
As if being blacklisted wasn't bad enough, the Hollywood 10 still faced contempt of Congress charges. A trial was held before a federal judge, and all 10 were found guilty. For almost 3 years, the Hollywood 10 fought their prison terms, eventually appealing to the Supreme Court. The 10 also took their case to the people.
When we were asked, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, the committee was really preparing to ask you, are you now or have you ever been in favor of peace?
But shall people who say no, there must be a way to peace, shall such people be investigated, smeared, blacklisted?
We believe this, and for asserting that belief before a congressional committee, 10 of us are going to prison, casualties of the Cold War.
They were convicted. They appealed to the Supreme Court. The appeal was rejected. And so starting, I believe, in August or September 1950, they went to prison.
The Hollywood 10 began serving their sentences, ranging from 6 months to 1 year. Kate Lardner is the daughter of Ring Lardner Jr.
They did not think that they would wind up in jail. I mean, that just seemed ridiculous. Nonetheless, he, you know, I mean, he behaved in a moral fashion.
In 1950, almost 3 years after the hearings on Capitol Hill ended, Ring Lardner Jr. was sent to prison. There, Lardner experienced some poetic justice.
The prison I was sent to was the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. Lester Cole and I both went there, where I found the chairman of the Un-American Activities Committee, the man who had asked me the questions, "Are you now or have you ever been?" Was already an inmate.
New Jersey Representative J. Parnell Thomas was convicted of misappropriation of government funds and sent up the river.
Lester Cole and he both worked outside the prison walls, and Thomas taking care of the chicken yard. And Lester just said to him, "Still handling the chicken, I see."
The families of the 10 also had a tough time of it. Christopher Trumbo remembers the trauma he experienced when his classmates discovered his father, Dalton Trumbo, was a member of the Hollywood 10.
8th and 9th grade, I guess. I was thrown into a furnace at school, but I didn't have any eyebrows or eyelashes left after that. You know, my clothes got burned, but I went home and, you know, I changed my clothes and went back to school.
One member of the Hollywood 10 finally did cave into the pressure, director Edward Dmytryk.
I do not think you...
Whether or not you remember the Communist Party, or whether you
I
ever were a
answered
member
by saying I do not think you have the right under the Constitution to ask me such a question.
After serving his prison sentence, Dmytryk decided he would answer the question and name names after all. Dmytryk decided that his career was more important than his politics.
Adrian felt about Ed Dmytryk the way I think you would feel about any informer. He loathed him. He had nothing but the deepest contempt for him.
So I'm reasonably sure that he made a rather cold-blooded decision, that he had to decide between his career and his politics.
Edward Dmytryk went on to have a fairly illustrious career as a director. All it took was pointing the finger at a few friends. Up next, their careers in ruin. How will the 9 remaining members of the Hollywood 10 sneak back into the business? And which of them would eventually go on to conquer Tinseltown?
This week.
In 1951, the Hollywood 10 were all free men, but how free were they? The 10 served their prison terms, but their lives were in shambles. And now they face the challenge of trying to put their derailed careers back on track. Writers Dalton Trumbo and Ring Lardner Jr. were 2 members of the Hollywood 10 who managed to find work using assumed names.
There was an enormous amount of secrecy, pseudonyms, occasionally meetings in out-of-the-way places. Constantly people were worried about telephones being tapped, which they were.
Another approach to beating the blacklist was a practice known as fronting.
That is friends of theirs who would put their name on the script and take it in and go to the story conferences, etc.
I know that people, of course, circumvented the blacklist through a front. That, of course, involved only writers. It couldn't involve directors. It couldn't involve actors.
Joan Scott fronted for her husband, writer-producer Adrian Scott.
I would have to go into the studio and participate in rewrite conferences on these scripts, and then come home and discuss it with him, and he'd get upset.
Eventually, the stress took its toll on Scott.
He worked in this little room in the garage with no satisfaction, no recognition. It ate away at him. As far as I'm concerned, the whole system killed him. The Congress, the informers, the industry. This man did not die a natural death at 61.
Ring Lardner Jr. fared a little better than his friend Adrian Scott thanks to the advent of television.
I did have enough of a reputation and so on so that I could find some work. The main work that I did for the next 10 years, from 1952 on, were television film series.
Dalton Trumbo's son, Christopher, did his part to help his father keep up the front.
I would take checks from one bank account, put them into another. I would deliver scripts. Sometimes I'd pick up large sums of cash and take those to a bank, that sort of thing.
Dalton Trumbo, writing under a pseudonym, surprised everyone when the 1956 Academy Awards were announced.
A movie called The Brave One was nominated for and won an Academy Award, and the name of the screenwriter was Robert Rich. And when Robert Rich was called at the Oscar ceremony, nobody came forward.
Why? Because no such person existed. Robert Rich was really Dalton Trumbo, who was home with his family on Oscar night.
We were actually watching the Academy Awards, and suddenly the brave one was the Academy Award winner for Best Original Story, which was a shock to everybody. Nobody really thought that it would win anything.
4 years later, Dalton Trumbo would become the first to break the blacklist.
In 1960, it was actually Otto Preminger who first announced that Dalton Trumbo had written Exodus and that his name would be on the screen.
Writer Ring Lardner Jr. also went on to win an Academy Award. In 1970, the hit movie MASH won for Best Adapted Screenplay. Lardner was there to accept his award.
The MASH thing was very satisfactory because when I went up to the platform to receive an Oscar, there was noticeably more applause than there usually is for the Writers' Award. By that time, people were beginning to treat it almost as an honor to have been part of the blacklist.
You know, I feel a lot of pride. And it's because of, I think it's because of the way he behaved, you know, and continued to behave on behalf of something he really believed in.
I think it was Dalton Trumbo said, we were all victims of this, the informers and the informed on and the people who didn't inform. Everybody was hurt by this.
But Dalton Trumbo finally received the recognition he deserved. In 1975, 19 years after winning the Academy Award under a pseudonym, the Motion Picture Academy finally gave Trumbo his award for The Brave One. Better late than never, I guess, but any way you look at it, these guys paid a pretty high price just for having the guts to stand up for what they believed in. I'm A.J. Benza. Join me the next time we look at the dark side of the spotlight on Mysteries and Scandals.
Front, really, against fascism, you know, during the 30s, against unemployment, against racism.
We saw bread lines through all the dim, dismal winter days of New York, and we believed that capitalism was failing.
But by the late 40s, many people came to believe communism threatened American values, and the committee suspected that anti-American messages were being interjected in films. Kenneth Lloyd Billingsley is the author of Hollywood Party and believes some communists were motivated to come to Hollywood.
They wanted more influence in the movie industry because the movies at that time were the biggest means of mass communication.
Actor James Cromwell disagrees.
Anybody in the film industry knows that it's almost impossible in the studio system to get any propaganda through into a picture because basically so many hands touch the picture.
I don't think in a group of writers it's possible for them to get away.
And participated in through public events.
Would you name those for the committee, please?
Well, the one chap I'm thinking of currently is Mr. Howard De Silva. Always seems to have something to say at the wrong time.
Film star Robert Taylor testified about what he considered were subversive activities within Hollywood. Character actor Howard De Silva may or may not have been a communist, but De Silva was just one of the people named by Taylor as a potential communist traitor. Blacklisted screenwriter Bernie Gordon.
When people like Robert Taylor suddenly became so vociferously anti-communist and pro-House on American Activities Committee, it surprised me.
Even more surprising was how membership in a popular political party became a national threat. After the Great Depression, many Americans were sympathetic to the communist agenda. Walter Bernstein was another screenwriter on the blacklist.
The communists were out in front.
Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? In the 1940s and 50s, that was the dreaded question in Hollywood. Why? Because if you were even remotely suspected of being a communist, your name was put on the list, the incriminating blacklist. Your reputation was ruined, your parking space was reassigned, and you never ate lunch in this town again.
You're an item one day, you're nobody the next day. This is a town of lists, A-lists, B-lists, blacklists.
On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll expose the dark forces behind the Hollywood blacklist, and we'll reveal the devastating consequences if your name appeared on the list.
they were destroyed, killed, made ill, suicides.
We'll also hear the confessions of a government witness who found himself trapped in a desperate situation.
I used to get calls in the middle of the night saying, look, you so-and-so, don't you dare cooperate with a committee.
I'm a New Yorker. I come from the East Side.
Have you ever tried to organize a group of writers to do anything?
But the committee hearings in October 1947 were no laughing matter for the 10 Hollywood professionals called to testify about their political affiliations. The men refused to cooperate. And all 10 were eventually incarcerated. Then in November of '47, 50 Hollywood power brokers met secretly to discuss the growing controversy. Del Reisman is the former president of the Writers Guild of America.
A group of the studio heads met at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York and issued a declaration saying they would not employ anyone who was a member of the Communist Party or who did not renounce that membership.
If communists have attempted to inject their propaganda into the motion picture, they have failed miserably. We will never...
Which is a creep. Am I right?
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we look back on the most notorious production in movie-making history, the Hollywood Blacklist. In October 1947, congressional hearings were held by the House Committee on Un-American Activities. The committee was investigating communism in the entertainment industry. Paul Buell is the co-author of Tender Comrades.
The point of the public hearing was to expose the evil of these people playing a role in Hollywood and to get them to name the names of other people they had known.